Hello there, fellow gamers. My name is Ashes, and I welcome you to the channel. Today we are continuing with Far Cry Absolution, a novel written by Urban White. So we are still on chapter 2. It's been a very, very long chapter, but we've come into the last few pages now, so we'll get these last few pages done in this video. So I've got the book open now, and let's begin the read. Of course, Will had been drunk when it happened 12 years before. He had been drunk most of his adult life, and losing them had made it no better. He tried not to think about them anymore. He tried to think of them like they were ancestors from another time, family long forgotten, kin in some way that had given him influence in some unknowing but completely necessary way. It was the father's words that had released this from inside of him, and as he lay there in bed, he tried to summon the spirits of those long dead that he had loved. He knew that, without a doubt, they were the reason he was apart from church and town, alone still even after he had given up his sin. He rose and put his feet to the floor and looked in the dark to the silver of lights beneath the door. They had given him a room in one of the houses with 2 single beds, and he could smell the lake through the windows that were open. The night air of Eden's Gate always seeming to move and drift like ocean currents in the liquid depths. By the time he had pulled up his trousers and laced his boots, he had thought too much about his wife and daughter. He could feel them. He could feel the tears welling in the dark, and how they brimmed and then fell across his cheeks and stung his skin. He was a messenger of his own demise. 12 years had passed since he'd lost his wife and daughter, and he'd never been more certain of the part he'd played and the pain he'd caused himself and the ones he loved. He had bought that drink. He had sent that bullet flying, just as deadly and accurate as any shot Will had ever taken. But he knew it now for what it was, and he recognised it as a self-inflicted wound. He pushed out through the door and stood in the empty hallway beyond and looked one way then the other. He did not know what time it was, and he did not care. He needed air. He needed to see the stars and moon, and to stand in the grass and see the night as he had grown accustomed to it in all his time out there hunting for the church. And though he always wished he could go back in time and do it better, he knew that change would never be. He had bought that drink for the man who killed his family. He had sent that man out into the world as accurate and straight as Will could have made it. At that time, on the road, on that exact night when his wife, Sarah, had finally said enough, not trusting Will to come home on his own. She had put their 10-year-old daughter Callie in the passenger seat and drove to get Will from the bar. Will had tortured himself thinking about the parts he'd played. Even now, he could feel his emotion he had come to know his guilt as it welled within him and rose into his throat. He swallowed it down like he'd swallowed it down so many times before. Then he stumbled down the hallway, like the old drunk he'd been, and now knew he might well be still. He stumbled on, trying to overcome his own guilt and sadness. He went out past the small living area and into the open night air, and he tried to somehow gather the pieces of his life together. He walked away from the compound and past several guards who looked his direction but gave no greeting but a nod. When he had seen the stars and looked across the lake toward where the hills began on the opposite shore and the mountains stood darkly sitting, he turned and came back again. A small campfire had been made close by the lake shore, and he came to stand just beyond the lights, looking at the woman who had no doubt lit it. When he stepped out of the darkness and into the pool of light created by the flame, Holly only glanced at him before looking back down within the fire. "You have trouble sleeping too?" Holly asked. "Something like that. There is truth in what the Father says, though it is easy in the dark waking hours of the night to question it." She nodded toward the section of log that sat a few feet off. "You should sit. I'll be the one to bring you back tomorrow, now that Lonnie's gone." He thanked her. He watched the flame dance. Then he said to her, "How does the Father know the things he knows?" Holly laughed. "You mean, is he clairvoyant? Psychic? God's own prophet?" Will just stared at her. "I mean, how does he know? How does he know beyond a doubt?" "No one knows beyond a doubt," she said. "God gave Adam and Eve paradise, and even God could not keep them from using their own free will." "You sound like him," Will said. "Like who?" "The Father, John. Every one of us, man or woman." "Adam and Eve?" "I guess so," he said. "Is that paradise?" "It is whatever you make it to be," she said. She looked at him now and laughed. He was starting to get the feeling she was in on some joke that he had no idea about. "Be careful, Will. They might not see what's going on with you, but I do." "Is that what's keeping you up?" Will asked, offering her a weak smile, trying to diffuse anything he had set in motion inside her head. "I'm waiting up for John." "How serious is this thing you have with him?" "Serious enough to have me out here waiting," she said. He looked at her. He looked out into the night. He wondered about the woman he saw before him. And he wondered about the woman he'd known before. He thought that they had been the same. but he did not know now if they were. You get lonely up here sometimes? It helps to have someone, she said. It helps to keep the mind from wandering too far afield. He looked at her. Holly pushed at a log with a stick, and they both watched as sparks kicked up in the flurry, then rose in the thermals. He wondered who she had been talking about, her or him. Mary May woke in the dark. Her brother had not taken her back down to Ford's End like he'd said. She had been given the little room in the little house, and she had stood there and watched him, this man that was her brother, but now somehow was not. She did not know him. She had thought she did, but she knew she did not know him anymore. You'll drive me back to town, won't you? Yes, he said. You'll come with me? Yes. Don't leave me, she said. Stay here. Stay right here in this house till morning. You can stay on the couch, and you can drive us into town in the morning. Yes, he said. She stood looking at him. In that moment he reminded her of the little brother she had once had. She thought of their mother, nagging on him. She thought of the answers he would give. Yes, yes, it was always yes. When she woke in the dark, she knew she was not alone. Drew? Across the room she heard a rustling, a shift of fabric, then the creak of a wooden chair beneath human weight. Drew, she called again. Yes, he said. Yes, I'm here. She put an elbow down, then turned and tried to see him in the darkness. He was a shape only, a shadow among the darker shadows of the room. Is something wrong? No, he said. She could hear him shift. She heard him stand from the little wooden chair she remembered had sat beside the door. Is something wrong? She asked again, listening still and watching the dark shadow where he stood. You need to wash, he said. Wash? Yes, you need to wash yourself in the water. You need to cleanse yourself. You said you would. Drew, she said, you're scaring me. There's no reason to be scared, he said. He took a step now, and he came toward the bed and moved up and along the side of it. Out of instinct, she pulled back. She sat up and put her hands out in front of her like she might fend off whatever this might be. Don't be scared, he said again. You need to wash. You need to be cleansed and prepare to face your sin. He had come closer now, and she looked wildly around. She looked for anything she might use to stop him, but there was nothing there, and before she could move another inch or throw up a hand, he had grabbed one of her ankles and turned sharply, pulling her from the bed with a savage tug. She came off the bed with her arms flailing, reaching for anything that might stop her fall. Nothing could be found except for the bare sheets, and she fell 2 feet from the bed and landed on one elbow, then hit her head. The pain was instant and reverberated down through her skin, all the way through her body. She had hit hard and fast, and she could barely think, except to know she was being dragged across the carpet. She turned and bent away from him, reaching out with her hands. Her fingernails dug for purchase but came away with only dirt and sand and lint and whatever other thing that could be taken underneath her nails. He swung open the door and the light flooded inward. She could see that he would drag her past the frame and out the door. She called his name, but he did not stop, and she reached and grabbed the leg of the chair. Then the door jammed as she went. For a second she held on, but he kicked her, then brought her up again, lifting her by the ankle so that she spun and twisted with her head dragged backwards across the floor and out of the little room. "Drew," she said. "Drew." But it was as if he didn't hear her. He kept moving, and soon they had crossed the living room. The door came open in his hand, and she was yanked out after him and then let go. She laid in the dirt and gravel of the drive, small bits of sand against her face and in the air. She coughed. The taste of blood from some cut she must have had inside of her mouth. And she coughed again, then tried to look around. John sat there, waiting for her. He was sitting on the tailgate of a pickup truck, and as she looked around, she could see the faces of many more. Men and women she had seen that day, church members. "Hello," said John. She turned and got a hand behind her and tried to sit. "What is this?" "This is the end," John said. "This is what I've always wanted for you. You have been alone. You have lived without the word of the Father, and now you will be alone no more." She tried to push herself up. She tried to fight them when they came for her. She tried to rip her arms away from their grip, but there were too many to defend from. Soon she was in the air, carried up out of the dirt and thrown down across the truck bed. She called her brother's name. She repeated it again and again, but she never heard any response. Okay, folks, so we have come to the end of chapter 2 at last. Hallelujah. It's been quite a long chapter. I'm just looking at chapter 2 now, the start of it. It started on page 51 and ended on page 116. So yeah, it is a long chapter. But anyway, we have come to the end now, so I'm going to end the video here. Now, I know there's been a few parts in the video where I couldn't get my words out right or said the wrong word accidentally. Also, you may have noticed I was reading a bit slow in this video, because when I'm reading fast out loud, for me, I can read and all that, obviously, but it's sometimes a struggle, so I'm trying to improve on that. But anyway, hope you all enjoyed this video. Until next time, take it easy, and I will see you all in the next one. Hello there, fellow gamers. My name is Ashes, and I welcome you to the channel. Today we are continuing with Far Cry Absolution, a novel written by Urban White. So we are still on chapter 2. It's been a very, very long chapter, but we've come into the last few pages now, so we'll get these last few pages done in this video. So I've got the book open now, and let's begin the read.